Good afternoon. I'm Alan Price, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Together with my colleague, Rachel Floor, Director of the Kennedy Library Foundation, and all of our library and foundation colleagues, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this special 45th PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel Celebration. Thank you for joining us this afternoon virtually to celebrate the work of the 2020 and 2021 winners and honorees. I would like to acknowledge all those who make this event possible, including the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsors Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, and AT&T, and our media sponsors, the Boston Globe and WBUR, and the generous supporters who help sustain the Hemingway Collection and its programs, especially the Hemingway family, Hemingway Limited, and our Friends of the Hemingway Collection members. We are very pleased to be collaborating in co-presenting this afternoon celebration in conjunction with the International Hemingway Foundation and Society. We are grateful, as always, to the Hemingway family for their continued support of our Hemingway programs, and to the distinguished judges for the 2020 and 2021 awards who have joined us for today's event. We are thrilled to have members of the Hemingway family joining us here virtually and watching online. As always, we send our greetings and best wishes to Ernest Hemingway's son, Patrick, and his wife, Carol. Patrick and Carol have long been the vanguard of support for the Ernest Hemingway Collection that resides here in the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. We are honored to be the world's largest repository for the writer's personal papers and photographs. For decades, Patrick's annual readings from his father's works at the PEN Hemingway ceremony were a real pleasure for us here at the library. In recent years, Dr. Seán Hemingway, the writer's grandson, has taken up this mantle. He and his wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway, co-chair the Hemingway Council, which raises funds for and awareness of the collection. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Seán Hemingway. Dr. Hemingway is the John A. and Carol O. Moran Curator in charge of New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. He is a renowned archaeologist with a specialty in Greek and Roman bronzes, and has excavated prehistoric, classical, and Roman sites in Greece and Spain. He received his doctorate from Bryn Mawr College, studied as a Fulbright Scholar at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, and has been a visiting curator at the American Academy in Rome. He is the author of numerous scholarly publications, including The Horse and Jockey from Artemisian, a bronze equestrian monument of the Hellenistic period, and of the novel The Tomb of Alexander. He is also editor of the Hemingway Library editions of Ernest Hemingway's works. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seán Hemingway to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Alan. It has been a long-standing tradition to read a selection of Ernest Hemingway's writing to afford him a voice at this event, which celebrates literature and new writers of promise. My uncle Patrick did the reading of his father's writing for many years, and it is my honor to do so today. In this COVID moment, when we have all come to know and rely on ourselves more deeply, I have chosen a brief passage from The Old Man and the Sea. It is from the beginning of the story, and you could think of it as a short profile in courage. The Old Man and the Sea. The boy was back now with the sardines and the two baits wrapped in a newspaper, and they went down the trail to the skiff, feeling the pebbled sand under their feet, and lifted the skiff and slid her into the water. "Good luck, old man." "Good luck," the old man said. He fitted the rope lashings of the oars onto the thole pins, and leaning forward against the thrust of the blades in the water, he began to row out of the harbor in the dark. There were other boats from the other beaches going out to sea, and the old man heard the dip and push of their oars. Even though he could not see them now, the moon was below the hills. Sometimes someone would speak in a boat, but most of the boats were silent except for the dip of the oars. They spread apart after they were out of the mouth of the harbor, and each one headed for the part of the ocean where he hoped to find fish. The old man knew he was going far out, and he left the smell of the land behind and rode out into the clean early morning smell of the ocean. He saw the phosphorescence of the gulfweed in the water as he rode over the part of the ocean that the fishermen called the Great Well, because there was a sudden deep of 700 fathoms, where all sorts of fish congregated because of the swirl of the current made against the steep walls of the floor of the ocean. Here there were concentration of shrimp and bait fish, and sometimes schools of squid in the deepest holes, and these rose close to the surface at night, where all the wandering fish fed on them. In the dark, the old man could feel the morning coming, and as he rode, he heard the trembling sound as flying fish left the water, and the hissing that their stiff set wings made as they soared away in the darkness. He was very fond of flying fish, as they were his principal friends on the ocean. He was sorry for the birds, especially the small, delicate, dark terns that were always flying and looking and almost never finding, and he thought the birds have a harder life than we do, except for the robber birds and the heavy, strong ones. Why did they make birds so delicate and fine as those sea swallows when the ocean can be so cruel? She is kind and very beautiful, but she can be so cruel, and it comes so suddenly, and such birds that fly, dipping and hunting with their small, sad voices, are made too delicately for the sea. He always thought of the sea as la mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats, bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as Elmar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant, or a place, or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as feminine, and as something that gave or withheld great favors. And if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought. He was rowing steadily, and it was no effort for him, since he kept well within his speed and the surface of the ocean was flat except for the occasional swirls of the current. He was letting the current do a third of the work, and as it started to be light, he saw he was already further out than he had hoped to be out at this hour. I worked the deep wells for a week and did nothing, he thought. Today I'll work out where the schools of Bonito and Albacore are, and maybe there will be a big one with them. Before it was really light, he had his baits out and was drifting with the current. One bait was down 40 fathoms. The second was at 75, and the third and fourth were down in the blue water at 100 and 125 fathoms. Each bait hung down with the shank of the hook inside the baitfish, tied and sewed solid, and all the projecting part of the hook, the curve and the point, was covered with fresh sardines. Each sardine was hooked through both eyes so that they made a half garland on the projecting steel. There was no part of the hook that a great fish could feel which was not sweet-smelling and good-tasting. The boy had given him 2 fresh small tunas, or albacores, which hung on the 2 deepest lines like plummets, and on the others he had a big blue runner and a yellowjack that had been used before, but they were in good condition still, and had the excellent sardines to give them scent and attractiveness. Each line, as thick around as a big pencil, was looped onto a green sapped stick, so that any pull or touch on the bait would make the stick dip, and each line had 2 40-fathom coils which could be made fast to the other spare coils, so that if it were necessary, a fish could take out over 300 fathoms of line. Now the man watched the dip of the 3 sticks over the side of the skiff and rowed gently to keep the lines straight up and down at their proper depths. It was quite light, and any moment now the sun would rise. The sun rose thinly from the sea, and the old man could see the other boats, low on the water and well in toward the shore, spread out across the current. Then the sun was brighter, and the glare came on the water, and then as it rose clear, the flat sea sent it back at his eyes so that it hurt sharply, and he rowed without looking into it. He looked down into the water and watched the lines that went straight down into the dark of the water. He kept them straighter than anyone did, so that at each level in the darkness of the stream There would be a bait waiting exactly where he wished it to be for any fish that swam there. Others let them drift with the current, and sometimes they were at 60 fathoms, when the fishermen thought they were at 100. But, he thought, I keep them with precision. Only I have no luck anymore. But who knows, maybe today. Every day is a new day. It is better to be lucky, but I would rather be exact. Then, when luck comes, you are ready. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Carl Eby, President of the International Hemingway Foundation and Society. Carl.
Great. Thank you so much for that lovely reading, Seán. Those are inspiring and beautiful words, and it's a great pleasure to follow them. Good afternoon. My name's Carl Eby, and as Seán said, I'm president of the Ernest Hemingway Foundation and Society, which was established in 1965 by Mary Hemingway, Ernest's widow, for the purpose of awakening, sustaining an interest in, promoting, fostering, stimulating, supporting, improving, and developing literature. The foundation is proud to promote Hemingway scholarship and new voices in contemporary fiction. As part of that mission, I'm really honored to be here today to celebrate the PEN Hemingway Award, which each year honors a debut novel of exceptional merit by an American author. For their extraordinary work, I'm delighted to congratulate our 2021 and 2020 winners, Kavai Strong Washburn and Ruchika Tomar, and the 2021 and 2020 finalists, Maisie Card, Raven Leilani, Douglas Stewart, C. Pam Zhang, Jamil Jan Koshai, Tomas Moniz, Madeline Fitch, and Regina Porter. I'm grateful also for this opportunity to thank the Hemingway family, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, the UCross Foundation, and PEN America for everything they do to support this award, Hemingway's legacy in American literature. I want to thank Ken Burns, Lynn Novick, and Sarah Botstein for their marvelous work, some of which we've all enjoyed in the past week, and for agreeing to join us for our Keystone conversation today, or Keynote. And many thanks to all of you, our audience, for joining us today. Finally, I want to extend our deepest thanks to our 2020 award judges, R.O. Kwan, Therese Marie Mayette, David Yulin, and our 2021 award judges, Ramona Asubel, Jack Livings, and Stuart Nadler. Distinguished writers, all of them. They generously dedicated their time and energy to the task of reading and to considering the many incredible and diverse debut novels that were published in 2019 and 2020. Thank you so much for this work. And now, R.O. Kwan and David Yulin. Unfortunately, Therese Marie Mayette was not able to be here with us today. But now R.O. Kwan and David Yulin.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
I guess we're going to introduce the finalists, right? So. I think we're going to start with you, Reese.
Hi. Should I start? Okay. I'm R.O. Kwan. I'm the author of the. And it's been such an honor to serve as a judge for the PEN Hemingway Award for debut novel. First up, we have 99 Nights in Logar by Jamil Jan Kochai. An honorable mention selection is an often surreal, often hilarious, always moving book about a boy in Afghanistan looking for an escaped family dog. This is a story rich with tender and powerful stories, the stories others tell us, as well as those we tell ourselves. And 99 Nights in Logar is a many-layered.
Hello, everyone. First off, I just want to thank the Hemingway Foundation, the judges, of course, and PEN America as a whole. This is really just such a deep, profound honor for me to just be included among this list of incredible books and incredible writers. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and I'll do a reading selection from my novel 99 Nights in Logar. Okay, this is early on in the novel. On the first day, voila, on the morning of my homecoming in the summer of '05, I arrived at Mor's house car-sick, pockmarked, jet-lagged, and barbecued raw by the Pakistani sun after an 8-hour trek through the White Mountains, while sweating floods in a black camise and partook 2 sizes too small, which Mor made me wear just before we crossed the border. And although I was already confused by the earlier events of the morning, my mind fell into a deeper frenzy when we entered Mor's compound for the first time in 6 years. About 50 of Mor's relatives had jammed themselves into the garden of the courtyard, up against the big green gate, and a flood of sparkling dresses and scarves swallowed me as I stepped in. Rahmatullah Mama locked me up in a bear hug as Baba stroked my hair and wetted me with old man smooches, before Abu tore me out of my uncle's arms and enveloped me into her chest. She stroked my dirty hair with her calloused hands and kept cursing America for stealing her children. A short while later, I found myself sitting in a big room of clay, not knowing how I got there, wondering where my parents were, and trying to avoid eye contact with 40 or so relatives. I had so much Farsi hurled at me all at once, I didn't know what to do with it. When I told my khalas and mamas and cousins that I couldn't speak Farsi, that I spoke only English and a little Pashto, most of them murmured and tisked and smiled at me sadly. But not to be outdone, they started to speak as best they could in a butchered mixture of English, Pashto, Farsi, and sign language. They asked me if I was hungry, if I was sad, if I was tired, if I was thirsty, if I was happy, if I was scared, constipated, lonely, sick, confused, nauseated, stupid, smart, always this dark, always this cute, always this chubby, always this hairy, this tall, this quiet, nervous, shy, lost. I said yes to every single question. So they asked me what I wanted more than anything. I want to see the old dog, I said in English. None of them knew what I was talking about. Sag, I said in Farsi. They blew up with laughter, cursed me and my Mor, and dragged me out to the orchard. Voila, when I first saw Big Buddha standing 3-legged beneath his apple tree, pissing on the bark he was chained to, I still thought he was the same old mutt I met and tortured the first summer I came to Logad in '99. And though I don't remember much of that first trip, my memory of this dog haunted me all throughout grade school, leaving me sleepless most school nights. In the orchard, as soon as I saw Budabash, I broke off from my family and rushed his tree with nothing but sabr in my heart and love leaking out my fingertips, wallah. And it was only after he crouched and lunged and swallowed forever the very tip of my index finger that I saw in his blue moon's eye, in the heart of the eyeball, what no one else was willing to see up until that point, that Budabash was not a dog at all, but something more like a mutant or a demon, wallah. So seeing what I did, and with nothing much else to do in the country while my cousins were off at school, for the next few weeks I called a jihad against Budabash, until, of course, about 31 days later, when he got free. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Yes, it was marvelous. David, I should have mentioned, because Therese was not able to be here, Therese Mayette, due to last minute family illness, I was going to fill in and introduce Tomás Moniz. And so that's my great pleasure to introduce Tomás Moniz and to read some words that Therese wrote to honor his work. Big Familia by Tomás Moniz is all heart. With striking realness and compassion, we explore the life of Juan Gutierrez, a single father learning to let go and embrace his daughter's new life and independence. The work explores identity, gentrification, and family by showing us the life of Juan up close. Juan loves his dive bar, his lover boyfriend weekly house guest, his bike, and his neighborhood in Berkeley. It was good to see a lens so human, humorous, and bright. Joy is exacted in the little things, giving readers teachings in love, acceptance, and parenting in scene with a beautiful and detailed scope. The humor and the grace within the book are striking and subversive in a literary landscape where it's rare to see happiness, relationships, pregnancy, or the life-changing stuff we all deal with in such an earnest and tender light. It's my pleasure to introduce Thomas Moniz.
Thank you very much for that introduction. That was really amazing. I appreciate it. And thank you for everyone and my opportunity to be here. So I'm just going to jump into a quick reading. I think I'm depressed. I wake and I focus on my morning routine. I shave and trim my mustache and eyebrows. I pat my belly and look at it from both sides. I shower. I dry off. I look at my pubic hair. I like it trimmed neat and tight, and I like my balls smooth. But I hate razors. So I cut the hairs right to the skin using long silver scissors. Pulling scrotum skin with one hand and holding scissors with the other hand is a delicate and dangerous operation. I find it relaxing. It reminds me I'm alive. After work, I get an afternoon coffee, and I look for eye contact. I almost never get any until Janet. She has a chubby face and a crooked mouth and is not at all my type of woman when I date women. She has nothing in front of her except the donut and a cup of tea, the string with the paper tab dangling down. She sits across from me at the communal table. I'm halfway through my double Americano and a lemon bar. We seem to fall into a pattern. When she sips, I sip. When she takes a bite, I take a bite. She smiles. I smile back. She says, "Don't copy me." I say, "I started first." She says, "Okay, I'll change it up." So as I sip, she takes a bite. She tries to create a different rhythm, but we seem to still match up. I laugh a little and blow the powdered sugar off the top of my lemon bar. She chuckles and says, "I'm Janet. Are you free for the next couple hours?" Normally, I'd say I'm free till 5 when my daughter comes home or Jared gets off work. Using my daughter as an excuse still feels instinctual. Using Jared still feels hopeful. They're both not with me. Like I still feel, though, I have places I need to be, even though I don't. Come with me. There's this Basquiat show I want to check out at the Oakland Museum. Janet and I bike along sanctioned bike boulevards, taking up the full lane. It's late afternoon, but it feels like the sun will never go down, the light bright and illuminating everything. I listen while she tells me about graduating from Chinese medicine school and learning acupuncture. She says, you practice diagnosing yourself first and then your classmates. It's a hoot. That was the best part, learning to diagnose each other, looking at other people's bodies, smelling them, questioning them. You even ask them about their poop. She says it like it would be a great thing to do at a party. I imagine the possibilities of reading the body like a medical book. I imagine those Chinese medicine charts with the numbers and lines and diagrams sweeping across the body, each connecting one thing to another thing, individual points creating that whole. She pauses for a moment and I ask, do you know how to help someone sleep? She asks, you? I say, yes. Lately, I've had a hard time staying asleep once I fall asleep. I do, she says, and lets go of her handlebars to look back at me. I can treat you if you want. I help my boyfriend all the time. We stop biking and stand facing each other in the middle of the street. She says, stick out your tongue and let's see what it says. I feel self-conscious about my breath, about the color of my tongue. She cups my chin firmly, but also with some grace and some gentleness. She tilts my head to the light. I stick out my tongue and she leans in to read it. She says, I would scrape the coating on your tongue, curdy tongue it's called. It can tell a lot about a person's health, but I haven't washed my hands. It's okay, I say quickly, not wanting her to stop touching me. She doesn't hesitate. She touches my tongue. She slides a finger across it. She looks at it and smells it, her face expressionless, clinical. She does it again, and this time she leaves her finger on my tongue for a second, about to scrape it. But before she does, I close my mouth around her finger and I hold it there. She laughs, but she doesn't pull her finger out. I keep my mouth closed and I shut my eyes. I imagine taking her entire hand into my mouth, her lips and crooked smile and face into my mouth. I imagine other things I love, like my daughter and my friends. I imagine Jared and his mouth and thighs and cock. I imagine placing all the things I care about into my mouth. I imagine how safe and healthy and full I would feel. Thank you.
I'm David Yulin. I was one of the judges for the 2020 award, and I am here to present Madeline Fitch, one of the runners-up for the 2020 award. Madeline Fitch's Stay and Fight is something of an inside-out novel, the story of an urban pioneer who becomes a rural one. In her efforts to find meaning, she makes a family of circumstance in the Appalachians, a kind of primordial place under assault by oil interests. That's a vivid set of conflicts, and Fitch does not shy away from environmental or political concerns, but at the center of this exceptional first novel are not only issues, but people, or the ways that people and issues intersect. Fitch writes with heart and empathy and an acute linguistic grace. Stay and Fight is a book about what it means to be committed, even or especially when it puts you and everything you care about at a certain necessary risk. Please welcome Madeline Fitch.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. And I'm really glad to be here and just sort of meet all the other writers kind of in person a little bit. And it was just an honor even to be read by the judges for this prize. Are some of my favorite writers. So thanks again for having me. I'm going to read a little bit in the voice of Pearlie, who's one of the first person narrators of my novel, and he's a 7-year-old boy, and this is his first day of school. He's just been living in the woods with his moms and his aunt, and now he's gonna go to school for the first time. Then it was the first day, and I opened my eyes and looked through the crack in the wall to the light out in the woods, and I felt the snake at my belly uncoil. I sat up, and the snake slid down into the wall. During breakfast, Mama L cried, "My velvet piglet," and Mama K sharpened my pencils with her whittling knife, and she said, "Oh, now you're crying, Lily? Well, just remember, I didn't think he should go in the first place." And I said, "Mama K?" And she said, "What, Pearlie, what is it now?" And I knelt down as Strongbow would, and I said, "Don't worry, I am prepared. You have trained me well. I will honor your training. I will return this evening, and I will be ready to give you my report." She said, "Get up. Let's just hope your report is that you don't want to go back to that horrible place." And she gave me my pencils. The mean aunt looked at the clock and said, "If he's going, he'd better go." And Mama K said, "I can't believe any son of mine actually wants to go to school." And Mama L lay on the sofa and wiped her eyes, and the mean aunt took me by the hand and led me down to the bus stop so I wouldn't miss the bus. In my lunchbox, there was a jar of pemmican packed in tallow, and there was a jar of milk, and there was a can of sardines with the tab I could pull, and Mama L had put a square of chocolate in there too, even though Mama K didn't know. The mean aunt marched me down the hill and pulled out some yarrow as she passed it. She chewed it furiously and gave me a fistful. "Chew on this, it has superpower," she said. "It will shoot juice into your brain that will make you so brave." It's like she didn't even notice that I was already brave. I was going to school, which was where the other kids were. So I pulled my hand out of the mean aunt's hand just as we got to the roadside, where the Modehead kid stood waiting for the bus. His eyes were crusty, and he was eating something from a piece of cellophane with a cool animal on it and sunglasses. He looked at me real quick, but then he looked away again, and the yellow bus pulled up so that the sun went dark, and I didn't wave goodbye to the mean aunt. I threw back my shoulders, and I walked to the door of the bus, and then I turned to the mean aunt, and I put my fist to my heart the way that a wolf rider would, a noble salute of undying gratitude and respect. On the bus, everyone was laughing, and I loved laughing. It was one of my favorite things to do, so I started laughing too. Except then I thought maybe we weren't laughing at the same things exactly, because the bus was full of kids, which was toxically cool, but they were all making the same sort of salute I had made to the mean aunt, the noble salute I gave so that the mean aunt would tell Mama Kay that I was steadfast and resolute. No one had ever laughed when I did the salute before, but when I saw all the kids on the bus doing the salute, I knew that it was funny. In fact, it was the funniest thing anyone had ever done, and I was the one who did it. I sat down next to the Modehead kid, and the girl in the seat behind us put her fist on her heart and said, "Hey, Bexley, aren't you going to say hi to your new friend?" So then I knew the Modehead's name, so I said, "Hello, Bexley, I am Pearlie. We could be new friends." "Could be, but ain't," he said. "I've seen you." "I've seen you too," I said. "Shut up," he said. "You wouldn't hide like that behind the sycamores with your mouth hanging open unless you were touched," is what my uncle said. "I am an elfin spy with optimum fighting skills," I said. "Part wolf. Maybe you are too." "You're touched," he said, "or you're a baby. That's how come you need a grown-up to take you to the bus." He pointed out the window at the mean aunt, who stood scowling at the bus as it pulled away, but that was just her face. "Is that your mom or is that your dad? I can't tell," said Bexley. The girl behind us laughed, so I was helpful and said, "Actually, I don't have a dad. That's my aunt." "You know what that makes you?" said the girl. "That makes you a bastard." "I don't think so," I said. "Yes, it sure does," said Bexley. "I have two moms and one mean aunt," I said. "Two moms?" the girl asked, and I said, "Yeah, Mama L and Mama K." "That makes you a faggot bastard," Bexley said. And I didn't know what either of those things meant because they weren't in ElfQuest, and they weren't in the Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening by J.I. Rodale and Staff 1970 edition, and my women had never mentioned them to me. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew I would have to remain extremely vigilant at school to find out. Thank you so much.
So next up, we have The Travelers by Regina Porter. The Travelers is a runner-up selection for the PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel, and it is a brilliantly moving saga about two families, one white, one black, across generations. This novel is richly peopled with vivid characters whose perspectives we are allowed to inhabit, one after another, in a kaleidoscope that gradually reveals an unforgettable world. The Travelers is a book with a gigantic scope and an even larger heart, and it is my pleasure to introduce Regina Porter.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored. I have a copy, a very, very, very old copy of Hemingway's letters to Fitzgerald in my library. So it really is an honor. I'll ask you to bear with me. My vision's running a little in and out. My allergies are acting up. I'm going to read from Act 2. And the only thing that I think you should know is during the Vietnam War, it was often difficult for soldiers they didn't have enough reading materials, especially for African-American soldiers. Listen to me now. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. I've seen them strolling the flight deck of the U.S. Olympus on the South China Sea. I've seen them tossing coins and talking all manner of crazy shit. They ask me what they did to Hamlet to make him treat them so. I tell them the truth between loading bombs on A4 attack jets. Bombs that will kill civilians and Viet Cong in almost equal numbers. You colluded with King Claudius. You cats were rats. Prince Hamlet was supposed to be your best friend. You cats were supposed to have his back. And that's when they get disgruntled and call me a surly Moor. Moor? Well, that's news to me. Last I heard, I was just another black man in Vietnam. Black man in Vietnam. Stare us to London, they say. Trust me, brothers, you don't want to go anywhere near London. You're right to lose your heads if you tarry there. But Rosencrantz and Guildenstern just toss their coins and shake their heads and say, Moore, you can't be trusted. We saw you throw Chief Mammoth overboard. You are a murderer. You and that other Moore murdered a man. You oughtn't to have done this thing. And I say, don't you think I know it? And then I count the minutes to lunch break and rush off to the laundry room to find Jeb. Jeb, I say, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are messing with me again. Jeb likes working laundry detail. He says clean laundry reminds him of Buchner County, Georgia. He grabs me by the arm and looks around to make sure nobody else is listening. He tells me to wait for him outside the black canteen. We don't eat with the white sailors unless we have to these days. We mostly keep to ourselves, Jeb and me. What the fuck is wrong with you, Eddie? Jeb finds me drinking cold coffee 10 minutes later. You aiming to get us court-martialed? You can't come in the laundry room talking loud like that about Chuck. Chuck is the nickname black sailors sometimes give white sailors. They sent a search and rescue mission out for Nellie, but no one knows when he first went missing. Only that he didn't show up in the petty officer's mess for dinner or that night's movie. Man overboard, they said. Chief Mamet had taken to drinking heavily. He was becoming a first-class lush. I'm just saying, Jeff, my voice trails off. They're in my head. You need to give me that damn play, Eddie. Hand over that motherfucking play and pick up a jet or ebony. I mean it now. That's not happening. I want to tell Jeb how sometimes Rosencrantz and Guildenstern sneak up behind me and whisper that Chuck is swimming back. I say Chuck, they say Nellie. I say Nellie, they say Chuck. It's like the war, circles within circles. But this bit of information falls under a long list of things Jeb doesn't need to know. Every evening after dinner, the captain of the USS Olympus announces over the loudspeaker how many bombs we've dropped, men we've lost, and targets we've described. Jeb puts a pillow over his head and points to the wall where he keeps his list. Jeb doesn't need to know. Like most of the sailors on the carrier ship, we've never set foot in Nam. But I've seen grunts and pilots come back in body bags or with missing limbs. I've seen the beyond dead look on the faces of some soldiers who don't understand their good luck and don't want it, and it makes me glad I've not seen combat. Maybe you need a little dope to take the edge off, Jeb considers me. I don't want dope, Jeb. I don't want to be strung out where I can't even stand up straight. What do you want, Eddie? Jeb says. You confuse and bedevil me with this shit. I nod. I want to see Agnes and the girls again. I want to get back to the Bronx. I want a home-cooked meal. I want to sit on my front porch and think about nothing. Then keep it together. Otherwise, we're both fucked, said Jeb. Thank you.
Okay, great. Just make sure my stuff is on. It's my honor and pleasure now to present the winner of the 2020 PEN Hemingway Award, which goes to Ruchika Tomar for her novel, A Prayer for Travelers. A Prayer for Travelers is a remarkable piece of writing, astute in style and structure, and also in the story that it tells. Unfolding in a small town in Eastern California, it traces the friendship of two women, a relationship that grows complicated until it shatters and one of the friends disappears. Tomar is an exquisite writer, and A Prayer for Travelers is marked by a deft and deeply rendered sense of place. Even more, the novel pushes back against our preconceptions, shifting fluidly in time to evoke a sense of the floating nature of existence, especially for characters such as these, who find themselves in nearly every way that matters, having to reckon with what it means to live on the periphery. Please welcome Ruchika Tomar. And congratulations.
Hi. Thank you so much to the judges and to the Hemingway Foundation. I'm so grateful for this honor. I'm going to read a short passage from the beginning of the book. The narrator, Kale, is the young woman at the center of the novel, and her grandfather, Lambert, known as Lamb, raises her. Chapter 3. Lamb took me to the Blue Creek Casino in Eagles Bay, the Lucky Grand, the Golden Bear, and East River Mills. There still existed in those early days a palpable space between the second father I made him into and the bachelor he used to be. Early winter mornings, when it was cold enough for our breath to fog the air, we packed into Lamb's truck for the long drive and watched the land dip and surge across the miles, breaching under a wide, glassy sky. I slept away the day, my head bumping gently against the window, and opened my eyes to fading dusk. How the first sight of sparkling lights outside a passenger window could transfix a lonely girl. We stood in the check-in line for casino motels, still wearing crisp January air on our cheeks and collars. I clung to the 3 outer fingers of Lamb's calloused hand, ignoring discriminating glances of older men and women. Who would bring a child to a place reserved for adult things, adult sins? I could have told them. Someone who has nowhere else to put her. I trailed Lamb across smoke-tinged rooms, treading elaborately patterned carpets, the wood tables polished as jewels. The underbellies of these casinos were cold and drafty basements, cheap carpeting buckling under card tables ringed with beer-glazed men, raucous and wild. A furtive society, balm to the desert's sand-worn lifers, those souls grousing eternally between earth and sun. Oh yes, the West still takes care of its own in these small, forgotten towns. We build in us still those cursed dreams of gold. At the East River, with a pale gibbous moon hanging high, we arrived weary. We checked in after midnight to 2 twin beds side by side. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of a heavy latch falling into place. In the next bed, the sheets were mussed, empty, and Lamb was gone. I pushed aside my own scratchy sheets and climbed out of bed. I looked for him in the bathroom and the closet as if a grown man might play games in the dark, as if he might hide himself away like a parcel. I stole into the cold hall, still muddled with sleep, wearing only a t-shirt. I took a few steps down the hall and nearly collided with an odd, dark stranger rounding the corner. He wore a high round collar and diagonal tie and a long frock coat. He walked on without a stumble or excuse, striding, his hands tucked behind his back. Lamb's word for a friend you meet in old places, a man you should never follow. Specter. The ghost brought me up short. I could have ridden the elevator down to the gaming floor and run across the carpet of players screaming for Lamb and rescue. They'd kick us out, which wouldn't bother Lamb a bit. But he would feel he had made an error, bringing a child on one of his peculiar tours to some place I might do little and participate in less. I was meant to spend my time amusing myself in the cafe with ice cream sundaes or watching the television in the room. Luxuries exotic when compared with our home, which held only books and each other. These trips always felt like running, but what were we running to? I returned to the doorway of our room and sat on the floor to wait. An hour passed, maybe 2. When Lamb manifested at the end of the hall, his expression was warm and loose, his eyes bright with the faraway look of someone who had visited a freedom and wished to remain there. He saw his impolitely dressed gargoyle in the doorway and bent to lift her. I didn't have to ask. He packed his bag and then my own. An hour later, ours was the only truck heading west on the 2-lane, zooming past the other cars that took fast shape in the dark, emerging from nothing and disappearing just as fast, highlights fading gently into night. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jack Livings. It's my great honor to introduce Maisie Card, whose novel, These Ghosts Are Family, is an act of reclamation, bold in its conception, elegantly executed, a courageous and ambitious novel, woven from language that ripples with compassion and insight, and that at every turn embraces complexity over simplicity, honesty over sentimentality. Engrossing and truthful, Card's novel is an interrogation of the colonial history of the West Indies, a narrative that gives voice to the lost and forgotten, those enslaved people whose ghosts decry the robbery of their lives and identities. And while Card's fidelity to the historical facts of the slave trade in Jamaica is unflinching, it's her recasting of orthodoxy and her brilliant capacity for portraying the generational consequences of that history that are this novel's great accomplishment. From the tattered, opaque lineage of the Paisley family, she has created a document of witness, one in which restless spirits rise up to speak their terrible truths.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm going to read a selection from my novel set in the present. It's set in present day Brooklyn, and all you need to know is that the character Irene is working as a home health aide, and she's decided to come to work, or she's had to come to work on the same day that she's found out her mother has died. Later, when Irene was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, she swore she heard the sound of a little girl laughing. She put down the knife and listened. After a few seconds, she heard it again. She followed the sound back into the living room, but all she found was Betty, still asleep, in the same position. The old woman was mumbling softly, but in her own voice, having a conversation with someone in her dream. Irene couldn't hear the little girl's voice anymore, but the sound had shaken her so much that she went into the kitchen and got a container of salt. Her mother had told her that salt could cleanse a house of spirits. She spread it on the carpet in the shape of a circle around Betty. She reminded herself to vacuum before she left. When Irene went to return the salt to the kitchen, she looked out the window by the sink and saw that it was raining. She watched, momentarily mesmerized, as the rain started to fill Betty's stone bird bath she kept in the backyard, next to the patch of ground where the swimming pool had been filled in. As she watched the rain, Irene thought about how the same year that she had poured the chamber pot on Vera, she had awoken weeks before in the middle of the night to the sound of laughter. It had just finished raining. She had looked out the kitchen window and had seen her mother running naked, Vera's wet body illuminated every few minutes by the light of a lantern, then fading away into the darkness. Their yard boy, Bernard, had been chasing her, and when he finally caught her, he pushed her body down into the mud, and Irene watched, wide-eyed with shock, as they ground their naked bodies against each other by the lantern light. To Irene, seeing them together like that was almost worse than the times her mother hit her. It was the reason she couldn't take care of Vera when she became old and sick. Every day she would have wanted to shake Vera with all her strength and demand to know why. Why did you love everyone more than me? Irene had never heard her mother laugh that way she had that night with the yard boy in her presence, and she never would again. But that is how Betty found Irene when she woke up, standing in her backyard during a rainstorm, completely naked, barefoot, alone, and laughing. Irene, what's wrong with you, Irene? Betty kept shouting. You were sleepwalking, Betty told her later, standing in the doorway to the bathroom as Irene sat on the edge of the tub, drying herself off. Let's hope you don't catch pneumonia. She didn't say anything about Irene's behavior earlier. She seemed not to remember. Yet Betty seemed both afraid to leave Irene alone and afraid to come closer. My mother died this morning, Irene said, and stopped there because how could she explain? How could she tell Betty that she'd been awake the whole time? As she tried to imagine her mother lying in her coffin, as she peeled off her clothes, as she stood feeling the cold drops of rain on her skin and the mud between her toes, and as the loud fits of laughter exploded from her, puncturing the serenity of the night like shrapnel. How could she describe that she'd felt like someone else was taking over her body? How could she capture the exquisite freedom of that? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ramona Acebel, and I was lucky to be one of the judges for this year's award. We got to read so many amazing first novels. What a tremendous pleasure in this hard year. The first one that I am lucky to introduce is Raven Leilani's Luster. On nearly every page of Luster, the reader encounters prose so good, so funny, so outrageously and thrillingly brilliant that it seems impossible this could ever be a debut. At Luster's core is Edie, a young painter who gets entangled in the lives of a white couple and their adopted Black daughter. The novel's obsessions are many: race and money and work and sex. It is about space and place, belonging, not belonging, escape and home. It's about the positive charge of sex and the negative charge on the way women's bodies and desires are felt in the world. But none of that captures the delight and glory of luster as a force, the squeamish and wonderful discomfort, the beautiful lines, the humor. It's a book that sings and a book that stings.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank the judges and PEN America and everyone who's here right now. This is really a special thing to me. So thank you. I'm just going to read a quick excerpt. Edie, the main character, is walking around the library and kind of thinking back to memories of her father. I take a bus to the Crack Library, and inside I can smell the natural decay, the fermentation, the glue and twine and leather, paper as it degrades and betrays its origin, reminds you it comes from the trees. I circle each floor until I get to an exhibit on wartime cognitive dissonance and the physiology of dissent. After a brief dedication to the donors, there are helmets, cracked, blown out, covered in names of wives, children, and wry condemnations of God. A Viet Cong bicycle on display backlit by warm orange light. Photographs of soldiers cleaning their glasses and tuning transistors, helicopter blades and jungle brush oiling the camera's aperture with movement and incomplete light, naked children in self-immolation and prisoners wilting on tarmacs, a daisy in the barrel of a gun having nothing on the unnatural look of a soldier's smile, the look of the incomplete synthesis of fight or flight, and the limbic system when it cannot compute. My father only ever smelled like this. Like every morning, he had to put on his skin and adhere to a code of behavior he could no longer understand, a highly functioning collection of pathologies with shrapnel on his back. He was years removed from the service by the time I was old enough to misplace his Purple Heart, but during prayer meetings and birthday parties, it was apparent he was different, molecularly, like some fundamental human component had either been emptied out or in bad days cranked up to 11. The 4th of July, or a person entering his room too silently, grounds for survival response so disproportionate that as a kid, you struggle to understand the blind anger and the periods of profound withdrawal. That when you go to see the fireworks with your mother and he isn't there, you understand that whatever keeps him away is scary, that it is sad. When my father was a soldier, his prefrontal cortex was not yet complete. He could not grow a full mustache, and when he came back home, he had a cane and a DIY tattoo with a woman's name. The cane was mostly for show. The woman was his first wife, and my mother was his third. He spent his formative years in various homes in the Bible Belt with grim aunts who could trace their American lineage to the original bill of sale. He kept chickens while his mother, the sibling his aunts didn't talk about, was in Louisiana slowly going mad. These were the terms of art my father gave to me as I was learning to swim, his old man's vocabulary having none of the clinical tact of the DSM-5. There were asylums, there was madness, and in the place of Germans, there were krauts. His mother did not have a chemical imbalance. She had something fickle, something female, so she returned to him with a severed frontal lobe. He was afraid of her like I would one day be afraid of him, because children, like dogs, are attuned to the signs of an impending storm. He became a man who always had girlfriends who didn't much like them, a strapping sailor with a dampened drawl in a center part, his unruly hair slicked back with pomade. Then the war, shit and mud and some fusion of the two, the shipwreck centrifuge and the axon unraveled to the center of the nerve, my father the civilian, alarming the neighborhood with his midnight walks, shining his metals. And he had done it, the thing that most animals do, but which only a few animals breathe. He had been up close and found it strange, killing for his country, a country that, once he was back home, reminded him that patriots could be shell-shocked, could be spangled in Arlington grass, but absolutely could not be Black. At home, the banks, the churches, the women were nothing. He saw that the people at home did not see Black men like him among them, that they were unprepared. So he came to New York armed with only confidence, and after 2 dead wives, my mother appeared before him on Broadway in 143rd, pretty and young and high. Thank you.
Hello, I am Stuart Nadler, and it's my great privilege to introduce Douglas Stewart's terrific novel, Shuggie Bain. Shuggie Bain is a comet of a novel, dazzling, blistering, unforgettable, and exceptionally rare. In telling the story of the young Shuggie trying to make his way in the Glasgow of the Thatcher years, Douglas Stewart has written a coming-of-age novel that feels as if it has always been with us. It's wonderfully intimate, unsentimental, and it's expertly drawn. Shuggie and his mother Agnes come alive in these pages in ways that leave the reader seared and also grateful. Shuggie Bain is a haunting, sophisticated, and gorgeous first novel, and I'm honored to introduce Douglas Stewart and his superb book, Shuggie Bain.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to all the judges. I can't wait to celebrate with you. This is where we meet our protagonist, Agnes, at the beginning of the book. Agnes Bain pushed her toes into the carpet and leaned out as far as she could into the night air. The damp wind kissed her flushed neck and pushed down inside her dress. It felt like a stranger's hand, a sign of living, a reminder of life. With a flick, she watched her cigarette dout fall, the glowing embers dancing 16 floors down onto the dark forecourt. She wanted to show the city this claret velvet dress. She wanted to feel a little envy from strangers, to dance with men who held her proud and close. Mostly, she wanted to take a good drink, to live a little. With a stretch of her calf, she leaned her hip bone on the window frame and let go of the ballast of her toes. Her body tipped down towards the amber city lights, and her cheeks flushed with blood. She reached her arms out to the lights, and for a brief moment she was flying. No one noticed the flying woman. She thought about tilting further then, dared herself to do it. How easy it would be to kid herself that she was flying until it became only falling, and she broke herself on the concrete below. The high-rise flat she still shared with her mother and father pressed in against her. Everything in the room behind her felt so small, so low-ceilinged and stifling, payday to mass day, a life bought on tick, with nothing that ever felt owned outright. To be 39 and have her husband and her 3 children all crammed together in her mammy's flat gave her a feeling of failure. Him, her man, who when he shared her bed now seemed to lie on the very edge, made her feel angry with the littered promises of better things. Agnes wanted to put her foot through it all, or to scrape it back like it was spoilt wallpaper, to get her nail under it and to rip it all away. With the bored slouch, Agnes fell back into the stuffy room and felt the safety of her mammy's carpet below her feet again. The other women hadn't looked up. Peevishly, she scraped the needle across the record player. She clawed at her hairline and turned the volume up too loud. Come on, please, just the one wee dance. No yet, spat Nan Flanagan. She was arranging silver and copper coins into neat piles. I'm just about to pimp out the lot of you. Reenie Sweeney rolled her eyes and held her cards close. You have one filthy mind. Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Nan bit the end off a slab of fried fish and sucked the grease from her lips. When I'm done taking all your menage money at these cards, you're going to have to go home and fuck that bag of soup bones you call a husband for more. The women cackled without breaking their concentration on the cards. It was sweaty and close in the front room. Agnes watched her mammy, little Lizzie, carefully studying her hand, flanked by the bulk of Nan Flanagan on one side and Reenie Sweeney on the other. The women sat thigh to thigh and tore at the last scraps of a fish supper. They were moving coins and folding cards with greasy fingers. It bored Agnes. There was a time before baggy cardigans and skinny husbands that she had led them all up to the dancing. As girls, they'd clung to one another like a string of pearls and sang at the top of their voices all the way down Sucky Hall Street. They'd been underage, but Agnes, sure of herself even at 15, knew she would get them in. The doorman always saw her gleaming at the back of the line and beckoned her forward, and she pulled the other girls behind her like a chain gang. They held on to the belt of her coat and muttered protest, but Agnes just smiled her best smile for the doorman, the smile she kept for men, the same one she hid from her mother. She'd loved to show off her smile back then. She got her teeth from her daddy's side, and the Campbell teeth had always been weak. They were a reason for humility in an otherwise handsome face. Her own adult teeth had come in small and crooked, and even when they were new, they'd never been white because of the smoking and her mammy's strong tea. At 15, she had begged Lizzie to let her have them all taken out. The discomfort of the false teeth were nothing when compared to the movie star smell she thought they must give her. Each new tooth was broad and even and as straight as Elizabeth Taylor's. Agnes sucked at her porcelain. Now here they were, every Friday night, these same women playing cards in her mammy's front room. There was not a single drop of makeup between them now. nobody had much of a heart to sing anymore. Thank you.
C. Pam Jung's How Much of These Hills Are Gold asks us to split the shell we've been taught about the West, about the gold rush, of a moment in history that always gets told a certain way, and from the crack emerges an entirely new vision. A Chinese family walks out onto the desert, gold nuggets sewn into clothes, the land humming with quiet magic, mythologies no one else notices, and two kids learning to grow up in this impossible landscape. The novel's sentences are knockouts, bright as gold, and at the same time, the story keeps digging deeper, past the pretty shiny things and into the dark, cool mysteries of love.
Thank you. I'm going to read from the very last page of How Much of These Hills is Gold. She thinks of the other direction, the hills where she was born and the sun that bleaches sky and brightens grass. She thinks about when she stood in a dead lake and held what men desired and died for. She thinks that was nothing really compared to the way the noonday sun makes the grass blaze, horizon to horizon a shimmer. Who could truly grasp it? The huge and maddening glint, the ever-shifting mirage, the grass that refused to be owned or pinned, but changed with every angle of light. What the land was, and to whom, death or life, good or bad, lucky or unlucky, countless lives birthed and destroyed by its terror and generosity. And wasn't that the real reason for traveling? A reason bigger than poorness and desperation and greed and fury? Didn't they know low in their bones that as long as they moved in the land unfurled, that as long as they searched, they would forever be searchers and never quite lost? There is claiming the land, which Ba wanted to do, which Sam refused, and then there's being claimed by it, the quiet way. Because maybe if you only went far enough, waited long enough, held enough sadness pooled in your veins, soon you might come upon a path you knew. The shapes of rocks would look like familiar faces. The trees would greet you, buds and birdsong lilting up. And because this land had gouged in you an animal's kind of claiming, senseless to words and laws. Dry grass drawing blood, a tiger's mark in a ruined leg, ticks and torn blisters, wind coarsened hair sunburned in patterns to leave skin striped or spotted. Then, if you ran, you might hear on the wind or welling up in your own parched mouth something like and unlike an echo, coming from before or behind, the sound of a voice you've always known, calling your name.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Kavai Strong Washburn, the winner of the 2021 PEN Hemingway Award. His extraordinary novel, Sharks in a Time of Saviors, is a precisely observed, deeply humane book that marries mythology, social and filial folklore, and the visceral realities of a single Hawaiian family teetering between poverty and comfort, disconnection, and profound kinship. Washburn's depictions are wide-ranging yet precise. He writes with equal beauty about gods and basketball, climbing and chemistry, imprisonment and desire. At the center is the luminous exploration of the Flores family's halting attempts to reconnect with a spirituality gradually lost over time. Sharks in a Time of Saviors offers its reader the unforgettable experience of discovering wonder on the page, both in its careful attention to detail and also in the way that detail recasts our own reality. The novel reminds its readers that exile is not always geographical, but is, as often, the territory of the mind.
Thank you so much, Jack. And thank you to the PEN America and Hemingway Foundations for this incredible honor. I'm gonna try not to cry, but it's so lovely to hear everybody else that went before me and read, to know that I'm in the company of such amazing artists. And I think because I spend so much time alone at home, trying to stay away from other people, it's nice to have a moment to be around so many artists at the same time and to hear their incredible work. It means it feeds me a lot when I go back to the keyboard in the mornings and it's, just me alone, and to hear everybody's art is just incredible. So thank you very much for this honor. And really quickly, before I read the section from my novel, I just thought I would offer a couple of anecdotes about the ways in which Ernest Hemingway's art has intersected with my own life. When I was living in Namibia, I was a teacher. I was teaching English at a remote village that had a boarding school that operated during the apartheid era in Namibia. And I was teaching at that school. And I was really young and didn't have any money, and I traveled there with just a little backpack. And this is before laptops or anything like that. So I didn't have that many books with me. I only had a couple of books. And when I got there, the teacher that had lived in the house before me had left a copy of the complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway in the closet. I found it when I was moving in, and I read it over and over the course of the time I was there. And I can still remember one of the stories I read, which is called An African Story. There's a moment in which one of the characters, a protagonist, he takes a fleck of blood from an elephant that he sees that gets killed in a hunting, gets hunted and killed. And he kept that fleck of blood, and he thought to himself, I'm going to keep this blood until I understand what it means. And he never understood what it meant. And I remember that line from that book, or that story. I've carried that line with me for years. This is like 20 years ago that I read that line. And later on in my life, I was studying Spanish. I was working for a social service agency in Guatemala, and I was studying Spanish. And one of the ways that I worked on studying Spanish was to read books that I knew in English in Spanish. And one of those books was The Old Man and the Sea, which I found at a very small used bookstore, bilingual bookstore in Guatemala. So, those are just some of the ways that Hemingway's work has intersected with my own life. So thank you for this moment. I'll try to keep the reading really brief. For those of you that aren't aware, the story is about a blue-collar family in Hawaii that is subject to a miracle. Their son is saved from drowning by sharks. And as their son grows older, they are witness to these other moments in which it seems like these miraculous events are occurring in their lives. This is a moment in which one of those events occurs. The parents are looking for their child, this boy that is apparently lost. And this is from the perspective of the mother. It was late. We wanted you back. So we took the path too. Around the corner and across the street from our house, the brown footpath dropped behind frazzled hedges to an open field. Scummed water trickled through a canal to the left, and beyond, a hurricane fence fronted the dusty backyards of muffler shops and industrial warehouses. Tuna smells bloomed along the path, which continued straight to a distant clump of trees. Along the path, as we walked, we saw cairn after cairn, each rock pile newer than the one before. Only the cairns weren't all stone. They were spiny and flashing with bike cogs, car engine parts, abandoned elbows of pipe. Some were already covered in weeds. What are these? I asked your father. He squatted next to one. Look like graves to me, he said, which I had already known would be the answer. Augie, I said. He's down here, your father said. Somewhere. Your father turned toward the trees at the end of the path. From the industrial lots came the sound of metal slicing over itself, the crack of a pallet dropping in the dirt. We stood and went on along the path, the graves at regular intervals, thin, shin-high piles of rocks and scrap metal. The last cairn before we reached the trees was topped with a half-buried plastic robot, something you had built in one of your incredible science classes at Kahena. The robot was a sun-scalded blue, scoured with animal marks. I bent and touched it. This is Nainoa's, I said to your father. It looked like a few brown scabs of blood were clinging to the inside of the robot's arms. What I smelled coming off the cairn was mostly a rocky smell, but underneath, faintly, something of old wet leather and rotting cotton. Some of the other stuff from before, that was from our garage too, I think, your father said. Had an old gear from his first bike. The trees were as close as they were going to get without us going into them. There was a dizzy feeling starting in my head. It wasn't as dark as I had expected inside. The trees were low, with sunbreaks. As we walked, the dizzy feeling I'd had expanded, running down my skull along each rung of my spine and throat into my chest. My eyes felt fogged, blurred, and when I opened them wide again, I snatched your father's hand, as if I might fill with whatever I was feeling and float away. We stopped. There was a clearing on the other side of the trees, and you were there, sitting in the grass, your knees kinked up with your elbows resting on them, fingers playing at the air between your ankles as if you were waiting to be picked up after school. Thank God, your father said. I thought maybe he was back here playing with himself. I told him to stop, which never works with your father. No, it's okay. I got a few friends that was like that back in the day. Did I tell you about how John tried with his dogs? Augie, shut up. There was a mess in the sky. A dark shape wobbled through the break in the trees, flapping and tumbling, and smacked into the earth right next to you. A feather fluffed through the air. The shape rose. I saw that it was an owl and dragged itself toward you, a few sloppy heaves of its bulk before it collapsed at your feet, chest up. We watched that chest swell and shrink, slower and slower. You closed your eyes and put your hands on it. Is he, your father said. The owl's breathing slowed again and again. It was such a paper-light thing. Your face tightened and furrowed, sweat rolled down the line of your jaw. The dizziness in me surged. I was weightless. I was in the sky, beating my arms, only they weren't arms. They were the stringy muscle and soaring sheets of feathered wings. I rocketed into the sky, all blue everywhere, but for the knobbed edges of the ko'olaus getting smaller beneath me. Everything was air, fringed in golden light, and I rose toward the sun like I was riding the fastest elevator, surging and expanding until everything I was seeing popped like the lightest bubble. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kawai, and many congratulations to you, and congratulations to all of this year's and last year's PEN Hemingway honorees. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hilary Justice, the Kennedy Library's Hemingway Scholar in Residence, to introduce our distinguished guests for this afternoon's keynote conversation. Dr. Justice is author of The Bones of Others, the Hemingway text from the lost manuscripts to the posthumous novels, and over a dozen scholarly essays on the life, works, and legacy of Ernest Hemingway. Hilary.
Thank you so much, Carl. Today, it's our special privilege to present today's keynote conversation with the Emmy Award-winning co-directors and producer of the documentary Hemingway, which aired this past week on PBS. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote guests, starting with co-directors Ken Burns and Lynn Novick, who've just this week brought us Hemingway. Throughout their careers, individually and working together, they've given us a constellation of films that invite us to see, remind us to remember and question with compassion and courage, conviction and grace, including Brooklyn Bridge, College Behind Bars, Baseball, and the Vietnam War. Ken, congratulations on Hemingway and welcome to the PEN Hemingway Award celebration.
Thank you, Hilary, and congratulations to all the winners. It's been so nice to listen over the last hour quietly to this extraordinary writing and to hear the echoes of Ernest in various places.
Lynn Novick, welcome to you and welcome back to the library virtually. Congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Producer Sarah Botstein has collaborated with Ken and Lynn for over 2 decades on Hemingway and many other films, including Jazz, The War, and Prohibition. She works additionally on digital and education initiatives, encouraging learners of all ages to embrace the relevance of history in our contemporary time. Sarah, congratulations. It doesn't seem like that long ago that you were at the library for some of the filming, and it's wonderful to welcome you back today.
Great to be here, and what an amazing way to spend the last hour of our life listening to all of you read. Really inspirational, so thank you.
Thank you all for joining us to help us celebrate the 2020 and 2021 PEN Hemingway winners and honorees. You've brought a clip from Hemingway to share with us today, featuring his 1929 novel, A Farewell to Arms. So let's watch that now.
Deserts and flees to neutral Switzerland with Catherine Barclay. They hope to marry and build a life together once the war is over. She is pregnant. But something goes terribly wrong in the delivery room. Doctors perform a cesarean. The baby is stillborn. Catherine's life ebbs away. Hemingway agonized over the ending, writing 47 versions of the final pages before he was satisfied.
I went to the door of the room. "You can't come in now," one of the nurses said. "Yes, I can," I said. "You can't come in yet." "You get out," I said. The other one too. But after I had got them out and shut the door and turned off the light, it wasn't any good. It was like saying goodbye to a statue. After a while, I went out, left the hospital, and walked back to the hotel in the rain.
Parts of A Farewell to Arms could have been written by a woman. Now, I regard that as a compliment. Hemingway might regard it as an insult, but I don't. Because it is the androgyny in a man or a woman that allows them, even if briefly, not utterly, to be able to put themselves inside the skin of the opposite thing. In many ways, I think it's his greatest novel. I do. It's the truest. It's also heartbreaking. I remember crying and crying and crying. He gets all the boy stuff, the man stuff. He gets the horror of the war. But when people put that book down, what do they remember? They remember a woman dying in childbirth.
If people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them. So of course, it kills them. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave, impartially. If you are none of these, you can be sure it will kill you too. But there will be no special hurry.
You know, of the many endings that Hemingway considered for A Farewell to Arms, I think we can all agree that he chose wisely on that one.
He did indeed.
It occupies a really interesting place in Hemingway's writing. It wasn't his first novel, but it is perhaps the one he got the idea for first. It has the longest lag in his career between the experience and the writing of it, between his wounding in World War I, compounded by the exhilaration and the heartbreak of his first love affair. It took him nearly a decade to even feel ready to start to write it. So Ken, you have to wonder what it is about this particular story, and perhaps about the Hemingway film, that takes such a long time between the idea and the creation. What happens in there? You know, for Hemingway, it was a decade. And I know that you've said that on a list that you found, it says after baseball, do Hemingway.
Yeah.
There's a similar lag there.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I think that's coincidental between him and us. But I do know that if you're looking for the one true sentence, sometimes you have to take a lot of detours. And I think the experiences of his life, watching, tragic cesarean sections happening with his dad, losing Agnes, the nurse that throws him over, sends him to Dear John, the obvious horror of the First World War. I think this is a great processor. This is a great editor. This is a great disciplinarian in terms of his own writing process. And I think that he wasn't going to get to it until he could. It's so wonderful that it's not his sophomore jinx. It's his sophomore masterpiece. And it's spectacular. And I'm happy that he waited so that we could hear the true sentences that emerge from all of that, not just the plot ending, but also the earlier moment of being strong in the broken places. It's as good as it gets in the English language. I'm happy to have waited and waited and waited to do him. And maybe for us, we needed to have all of the films, some of which you listed, under our own belts before that could be. We could try somebody as complicated and with such undertow as Hemingway.
I love what you say about that undertow. It's really profound with Hemingway, and the more you learn about Hemingway, I think the stronger and deeper and more profound it gets. Lynn, in your work, you often focus on the transformation that can come out of extreme vulnerability and painful circumstance. What is it that fascinates you about those conditions and that transformation, whether it's Hemingway or other projects you've worked on?
Wow. I mean, maybe in some way because it represents the extremities of the human condition that we all have to deal with. As Ken always says, we all have to face mortality and loss. And when you're exposed to or around or have the privilege of getting to know and hear from people who have experienced those things directly, if you've been lucky enough to have avoided them so far, you know, it brings us sort of closer to something eternal and profound in all of our lives, I guess. I mean, I never really put this in words, so thank you for asking it that way. But I do think it's something where we are all looking for some kind of meaning, some kind of purpose, some way to make sense of what is this thing we have to go through called life. And so that's what Hemingway was trying to do. And, you know, as you were saying, what took him so long to write the book, I wonder whether he needed to just make sense of his own experience of having almost died and, you know, facing that existential experience and just living life, getting married, having children, you know, going forward, but then continuing to circle back to this moment. I don't know. I think we all are looking for that. So I'm stumbling around because it's a very, very important question. I can't quite answer it, but all I can tell you is that for all of us working on these kind of projects, when we have that privileged experience of having someone share those moments with us, we all feel sort of expanded as human beings. There's something very transformational for us in having people share those feelings and experiences, you know, so openly and honestly.
I think you said that really beautifully. I didn't detect any stumbling or fumbling around. You know, Sarah, one of the things I wanted to ask you a little bit about is your role. Everyone, I think, is familiar with the title producer, but what a producer does is a little mysterious to those of us who occupy a place more in the world of print culture. So for the Hemingway film, I know that you kept an eagle eye on details as fine as the texture of the paper. It's an eye that I think at times seems to rival Hemingway's own eye for detail, which, you know, I think is pretty profound. So what's the creative angle, the energy that you bring to this alchemy? What is your role in this collaborative process of storytelling?
Oh, that's a great question. I usually say that I get paid to worry and make sure that every single aspect of the subject in the film, that film that we're trying to tell, comes together in some way that a viewer can see. So, and it changes over the course of the project, and a lot of it is very detail oriented, but a lot of it is also very big picture. We've got to make this deadline and make sure we have our interviews shot, even if it's COVID, you know, that kind of stuff. I mean, we work in a very tiny collaborative brain trust. At the biggest, a project like Hemingway has 20 people on it. At its core, it's 4 of us, 6 of us, 8 of us. So it's really a collaborative process of brain trust. And we've said this a lot in the last few months talking about Hemingway, that, you know, he obsessed about a comma and a period and the title of a work, the way all of you artists do. And we do the same thing as a, not always alone, but as a collaborative force. So I guess my job is to help put all the little teeny tiny pieces of the puzzle together so people can watch it on TV.
Thanks, I love that. You know how I feel about details, so.
I will say holding the Hemingway manuscripts is one of the high points of my professional life. So I feel grateful to you and everyone at the library for making that possible for us to actually research them and then film them. I don't think anyone can really understand what that feels like, and to see that paper.
It's magical, isn't it? I'd like to broaden it out just really briefly and talk a little bit about the power of story, because that's something that everyone involved in today really shares. You know, what work do stories do? What do they do for individuals, for our culture, and for our world? So as we celebrate today's narrative achievements, I'm just gonna ask each one of you in turn, and Sarah, I'm gonna start with you, and then we'll work backwards. What is your message to future tellers of stories in whatever medium who might be watching today's really inspiring event?
Wow. This is quite a way to spend a Sunday afternoon. I would say the thing that makes the readings we heard earlier and the work we do satisfying and a great book hard to put down is this marriage between the individual and the human experience. And you're helping to teach some aspect of the human condition. And I think Hemingway did that beautifully. All the writers who are reading today do that. And I hope our films do that in a different way, whether you're reading a word or watching something come to life on screen.
Thank you. Lynn, what about you? What would you like to tell people out there who are considering bringing their stories to the public, but maybe haven't started yet?
You know, there's a word that Hemingway uses a lot, which is true, the one true sentence, to say something that is true. And I, you know, in thinking about that, I don't really know exactly what he means or what any of us, it's a very subjective, it's a huge concept and it can be interpreted so many different ways. But I think for an answer to your question, it obtains for me. When I pick up a great book, if I stick with it, it's because it feels true to something. Maybe I'm learning about a whole other experience, human experience, or part of the world, or time in history, or time in the future, or something that never happened, you know. But if it feels true within the world of its own creation, I'm in. And I think there's nothing better than being carried away on a story where you feel that way. But there's no rules. That's what's so great about the art of fiction. It could be anything. So it could be Farewell to Arms. It could be Song of Solomon. It could be 100 Years of Solitude. I'm thinking of my, you know, some of the great work we heard today. There's no one way to do it. And that's what makes it so joyous and transporting. Even when it's a tragic story, we feel joy in the experience of it. So that's all I can really say about that.
That's awesome. And Ken, you know, you and I talked briefly about the vulnerability that it takes to share someone's truth with the world. What would you like to say to the writers today and to those who are coming up behind them in the world of literature and filmmaking and art? Just
let me start and end with two novelists. The first is Leo Tolstoy, who said that art was the transfer of emotion from one person to the other. I couldn't help but think, as we've got a prize named for Ernest Hemingway, that this is a person who remade the short story that Kauai found in a closet in Africa and, you know, was sustained for such a long time by. This is a person who remade in a totally different way the novel, experimented with nonfiction. It seems that in some ways the nonfiction, as great as many passages are in it, aren't as true, as Lynn would say, as some of the stories and the novels. And so I'm reminded of a contemporary novelist, Richard Powers, who said the best arguments in the world won't change a single person's mind. The only thing that can do that is a good story. And whether you're a filmmaker or a novelist or a short story writer, I think the objective is the same, that one true thing that can be communicated, and you know it as you're reading it or seeing it. And so I'm so happy to get caught up in the whirlwind of this extraordinary, the 2 years, the pent up energy of 2 years of this award, 20 and 21, and also our gratitude to the Hemingway family, to Patrick particularly, who sat for an interview, to the JFK Library for giving us that extraordinary access. And we believe in that power of story as opposed to argument.
Thank you all so very much. Sarah, Lynn, Ken, it's been wonderful seeing you. Congratulations again on your film. And thank you so much for helping us celebrate today's just fine collection of emerging writers. We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Hillary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's amazing. Really, congratulations to all the writers today.
Yes.
I echo that. Again, I'm Alan Price. I congratulate all the writers. I thank all the judges. I thank you for that fascinating conversation, Ken, Lynn, Sarah, Hillary. Many thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us virtually. Thank you again to all the marvelous writers and the judges, and thank you for all you do as creative people, using the power of word, using the power of story to enrich the world. Be well, and we wish you all a marvelous afternoon.